Hi, this is Scott Wilkinson, host of Home Theater Geeks. In episode 198, I chat with Roland Vlaicu, Dolby's Senior Director of Broadcast Imaging, about Dolby Vision high dynamic range technology. So stay tuned.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Home Theater Geeks is provided by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Home Theater Geeks with Scott Wilkinson, recorded March 20th, 2014. Episode 198, Dolby's Vision. Hey there, Scott Wilkinson here, the Home Theater Geek and editor of avsforum.com. This week's guest geek is Roland Vlaicu, the Senior Director of Broadcast Imaging at Dolby Laboratories. Hey, Roland, welcome to the show.
Hi, Scott. It's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, you bet. Thanks for being here. Those who are tuned into the live stream at live.twit.tv or logged into the chat room at irc.twit.tv can post questions for Roland as we go, and I'll pass along as many as I can. Now, if you want to catch my attention with those questions, please use my screen name in the chat room, Scott Wilkinson, all one word, no dots, dashes, or spaces. So, Roland, what we want to talk about today is Dolby Vision. Now, Dolby obviously has been known for many years, decades in fact, for its audio technologies. But more recently, the company has been getting into various video and visual technologies, right?
That's right. So it's been about 10 years ago that Dolby has started to invest into imaging technology, initially driven by the transition to the digital cinema market. Our first imaging product or technology product that involved imaging technology was a digital cinema playback server in 2005, and then followed by our theatrical Dolby 3D system in 2006. And then in 2010, we launched our professional reference monitor, the PRM 4200, which to great acclaim is now used in high-end color grading suites all around the world, primarily Hollywood, but also in broadcast applications. So very proud of that. And then about 2.5 years ago, we started our activities around bringing some of our imaging technologies into the home. And the first one that we started to work on was the glasses-free 3D technology that we're doing in collaboration with Philips. And then more recently, as of this past CES, we launched Dolby Vision, a technology that enables a high-quality, true-to-life visual experience that adds high dynamic range and wide color gamut to the viewing experience.
Now Dolby 3D is also a fascinating topic, and if we have a chance, we'll talk about it on this show, but really I'd rather save it for another show because it's a subject unto itself. But Dolby Vision, the most recent announcement from Dolby regarding visual technology, is fascinating to me because it represents a true quantum leap in the display, the capture, delivery, and display of more information than we're used to in the current TV system. Certainly more than we can see on TV, because what we see in real life is much more than we can see on TV. Now, there's visual reality, there's what the eye can see, and then there's what the current TV standard shows us. In terms of dynamic range, that is the difference between the darkest thing we can see and the brightest thing we can see, is one of the hallmarks of Dolby Vision. And there's a graphic that you sent me that I want to show everybody, which is it's a representation of the dynamic range of real life and also of what the TV can show. And if John can find that, I'm afraid I probably didn't name the files very, very well. No, that's not the one. It's a graphic. It's a sort of a vertical. There it is. Now, if we can zoom in on that, we can see sort of the the range of light, really of brightness that is out there. This, why don't you tell us what we're looking at here?
Right. So you quite rightly said that the perception of reality by the human visual system depends a lot around the subtleties of the perceived dynamic range and color. So in addition to some of the features that are state of the art, like high resolution video, HD or 4K or Ultra HD, as well as higher frame rates or dimension, 3D depth.
Right.
We believe that dynamic range and white color are the two most influential parameters that really create a truly compelling imaging experience. And those are two parameters that haven't really been researched much in the context of motion video. Of course, there's high dynamic range photography that has been around for a while. But the point of Dolby Vision is we want to bring this visual experience all the way to the display. So this involves the entire chain, the ecosystem, as we call it, from capture of the visual signals all the way to the display in the home. And this graphic here illustrates some of the ranges of what the reality looks like. So the units on this scale are nits. So this is a measure of brightness. It's the same as candela per square meters. And as you can see, the bright sun is about 1.6 billion nits, and then we go down into 1 million nits of indirect sun. A light bulb is 18,000 nits, fire 3,000, indoor light. And if you look at that purple scale on the left, what today's TV standards allow you is to encode peak brightnesses or represent peak brightnesses only up to 100 nits. So that is fairly dim. The reason it's 100 is, that stems back from the days when cathode ray tube televisions were all the rage. And that's when this standard was defined. So this is more than 20 years old. And over time, quite naturally, what has happened is that this standard or this signal representation has become outdated. Now, the good news is that the devices at the each end of the spectrum, each end of this ecosystem, meaning the cameras, as well as the televisions in the home, they both have evolved to have much more superior capabilities. But unfortunately, those are not leveraged because the bottleneck in the middle, that is the signal representation that is limited today to 8 bits per pixel in terms of representation, has become a bottleneck. And Dolby Vision removes this bottleneck by enabling a much bigger pipe for the signal, the high-quality signal that gets acquired in Hollywood or for broadcast television, and then travels to the home, to TVs in the home. That pipe is opened up by Dolby Vision, and therefore TVs in the future will be able to look much brighter and much more realistic.
You make a good point, and it brings up one of the points I wanted to make sure we talked about, which is that the introduction of Ultra HD, or UHD as it's called, 4K as it's often called, I think mistakenly, but nevertheless it's there and it'll probably stay. The development of this new technology really is an opportunity to update the entire television ecosystem, as you call it, from this antiquated standard that, as you mentioned, has been with us for 20 years, much more than 20 years, I think, ultimately, in terms of the number of colors, the range of colors that can be reproduced, and the dynamic range, the difference between dark and light that can be reproduced. So, I'm really excited about this, to tell you the truth, because UHD up till now, everyone talks about more pixels, right? 4 times the number of pixels of HD. But if you're looking at a 50-inch screen at a normal seating distance of, say, 10 feet, which is too far away for a 50-inch screen, even for HD, but let's put that aside for the moment, you're not going to see that much improvement, are you?
Right. So the enhancements that so far have been proposed and have made it into the marketplace, I would consider those to be evolutionary enhancements, like increased spatial resolution, meaning more pixels going from HD resolutions to 4 times that with Ultra HD, as well as higher frame rates. So those are great enhancements. And we're not trying to say you have to pick and choose between Dolby Vision or any of those. instead, Dolby Vision is a perfect complement to all of those. So Dolby Vision can be combined with HD video. It can also be combined with Ultra HD video. It makes any video look a lot more inspiring and realistic. So the reality is, as you say, quite rightly says, Scott, that the TV industry is waking up to the reality that consumers, it's really hard to relay the story to consumers that Ultra HD by itself, as it's being presented today, is a compelling value proposition. And, that really is not a problem in itself. But our ideas are basically to say, look, why don't you go another step further and add to it the dynamic range and color gamut components, and then you have a truly compelling value proposition that consumers will instantly recognize. So the beautiful thing is, we can talk about this topic for an hour here, and the listeners and the viewers will get an idea of what it is about, but you really have to see it to believe it. And the point here is that, once this technology is, at retail on the wall of TVs at our electronics retailers, the TVs that have high dynamic range will instantly stand out. The salesperson won't even have to explain much. It will be obvious that this is the highest quality image and much higher than what is being delivered today.
So that brings up the question that I was going to save till the end, but I'll ask it now. Why not? When will we be able to see that? I totally agree with you that we can talk about it till we're blue in the face, or green or red, but it won't make the same impact of seeing it. And I've seen it, and I'm incredibly impressed by it. And I know that anybody else who sees it will be immediately and incredibly impressed by it. But there is no way for consumers to go see it at this moment in time, is there?
Right. So the market rollout plans envision a rollout of these devices later this year or early next year. And one of the reasons this takes a little while is because we're fundamentally changing the paradigm of consumer video. So we talked about how cameras that are used in Hollywood are already capturing a lot of this good information, this goodness of dynamic range and color gamut, and then this information needs to be moved throughout the entire chain for post-production, ultimately delivery, encoding, etc. And we have solutions for all of those, but they all need to be implemented, and that's what's happening. We've started to socialize the concept of this technology over 2 years ago with Hollywood studios, with post-production houses, and also, of course, with the TV industry. And we came out of the stealth mode at CES this year by launching Dolby Vision to the public as a technology along with partners. So we've announced several TV OEM partners, as well as over-the-top streaming partners who will be streaming movies in Dolby Vision when those TVs become available. So later this year, early next year will be the sweet spot.
I do know that Vizio was one of those companies that showed a Dolby Vision equipped or capable TV. Who were some of the other TV manufacturers?
Yeah, so in addition to Vizio, we announced Sharp and TCL, which is a fast-growing TV OEM from China. That
Big TV company in China, yeah.
Yes, then they're number 3 in the world behind LG and Samsung. So they're, significant. And all those manufacturers so far have had the problem that there was really no reason for them to build better and more capable TVs, because there's only so much you can get out of today's signal. And already today, any TV that you have in your living room is taking this, as we just talked about, this 100 nit master grade and stretching it to about 400 or 500 nits of peak brightness. There's also stretches going on in the dimension of color gamut, because the display panel, the LCD panel or plasma panel that is built into those TVs has the capability to show much more color than what is in the signal. So stretching is going on there as well. So the TV essentially makes up a lot of the ends up being the final presentation of the image. And of course, that is varies significantly from one product to another. And but more importantly, it does not retain the artistic intent. So when a director sees their movie on a given TV today, it will look different on every TV, and neither TV will have exactly the representation that the director intended. Some of the viewing modes for some of the high-end enthusiasts on this show some of the viewing modes that have been designed to retain the artistic intent, the reference modes, movie modes, those get much closer to that. But those are really only usable under ideal viewing conditions, meaning a very dark viewing environment or very dark living room or home theater. And the bulk of people, don't watch movies that way. And with Dolby Vision, you can, take your TV basically out into the backyard and you still get an amazing image.
Yeah, you bring up some points that I make all the time, which are, I certainly advocate for calibrating a TV to the current system standards because that's what the content is delivering. And yet when people do that, they often say, oh man, the picture looks dim and the colors aren't as vibrant. And I generally say, well, just sit with it for a little while, get used to it, and it will look much more natural. And it's certainly more reflective, more accurately reflective of the director's intent. The other point I want to make sure that we understand is that when the TV does stretch the dynamic range and stretch the color gamut artificially, then it's essentially distorting what the director's intent was. It's distorting the image, which I never like to do. But as you say also, if you're watching in a bright light environment, you're hosting a Super Bowl party or something in your house, or you have a TV outside, you can't use the calibrated picture because it's going to look too washed out, too dim, not very good. So let's talk about Dolby Vision and what its various components are. We talked a little bit about dynamic range. What's the dynamic range that you're shooting for in Dolby Vision?
Right. So we have designed a system that can retain, a significantly higher dynamic range than today's signal representations. As you know, today in the color grading process, the signals get dumbed down to a representation at 8 bits, which is ultimately delivered to the home. That is really not enough to represent any kind of dynamic range or wider color gamut. Our system uses a combination of a 12-bit signal representation along with a curve that we call PQ, which stands for perceptual quantization. So there we have basically developed an alternative to gamma in order to better utilize the bits at our disposal, because otherwise we would need a 14 or even 16-bit system to carry this dynamic range that we are targeting to the system. However, the realities of infrastructure today are essentially limited to 12-bit on a good day, so that by no means is that widely available, but there are bits and pieces of the ecosystem that already exist that support 12-bit, so we are designing to that 12-bit representation, but with the help of the perceptual quantization curve, we can actually store more dynamic range in there without creating a noticeable difference. So we went through and basically looked at the steps in terms of light output that you can go through, and then using the metric of J and D's, just noticeable differences, determined exactly what this curve needs to look like in order to quantize an image that has extended dynamic range to fit into a 12-bit container. And then once that is done in color grading, of course, you need a very high dynamic range display to even see this information. So we've built some prototypes and reference displays that can visualize up to 4,000 nits of peak brightness and significant dynamic ranges, as well as extended color gamut. So our display can show information up to P3, even though the system that we defined supports color gamut up to Rec 2020, which is the really even more extended color gamut of Ultra HD. And then once
hang on a second. Before you're going over a lot of stuff here, and I want to make sure our readers, our listeners, and viewers are keeping up with us, as it were. First of all, can you give us a brief description of what gamma is?
Right. So the perception of the human visual system is not linear in terms of the different steps in light output, and gamma was basically designed to optimize the curve for cathode ray tube televisions, and we're basically still working with that legacy.
Even though no one watches cathode ray televisions anymore.
Exactly, but it's been designed inherently into the system, and that is one of the limiting factors as to why we can't really reproduce or represent high dynamic range signals. So we basically said, look, if you want to represent high dynamic range with gamma, you need even more bits per pixel, but because that is really not practical, we came up with this new curve that we're currently standardizing in SMPTE in order to make it available to the broad industry, with the hope that it will be used as the new de facto standard for signal representation in the higher dynamic range and wider color gamut world, and then use that as a baseline for delivery, encoding, delivery of the system.
Am I correct that gamma might be described or defined as the relationship between the input signal and what brightness it's telling the display to create and the amount of light that's coming out of the system itself?
Right.
So it looks like a curve. I'm sorry I don't have a graphic to show you, those of you who are watching this, but basically it's not a straight line. It's not as the brightness indicator in the signal goes up, the brightness coming off the screen goes up in a linear fashion. It goes in a curved fashion. And as you say, that's what we've been using for the last 50 years and more. And so Dolby has come up with a different way to represent the relationship between the input, the brightness as indicated in the input signal, and the amount of light coming off of the screen. Have I got that right?
Yeah, I think that's the correct characterization. Because when we did this work, it was really necessary to change some of the starting points. Because as we said, the gamma curve for over 50 years had served its purpose, but since nobody's really looking at video on cathode ray tubes anymore, it really is no longer up to date. And also the work that we started to do in high dynamic range, where by building actual reference displays that can show the dynamic range. I mean, this has been done for the first time ever. Nobody else has built those types of displays, and so we learned a lot. But that also ultimately led to some conclusions around some of the fundamentals that need to change.
Right. And then you also mentioned the number of bits, and I want to make sure everybody understands that as well. Currently, we represent brightness with 8 bits. So there are 256 different levels of brightness. Actually, fewer than that. An 8-bit number can go from 0 to 255. Video is normally defined as 16 to 235. So there's a little what's called footroom and headroom above and below video black and video white. But 8 bits really isn't sufficient if we're going to increase the dynamic range, because tell us why.
Well, because what is happening today, when you look at reality, you look out the window, you see a high dynamic range image. Just like I'm looking at the skyline of San Francisco here in my conference room, and I see the inside of the black window frames, and yet I see a building, a white building that is lit up by the sun. So this is a very high dynamic range image, which with my visual system I can perfectly pick up with my eyes. I don't have any problems with that. If I held a standard camera with a standard display in this direction, I would end up with a compromised image. And that's exactly where the 8 bits are just no longer enough. So what happens is that very bright areas get washed out. So structure and detail on surfaces that are extremely bright just disappears. Everything just becomes plain white, and there's no more detail inherently available in the signal, and therefore it cannot be reproduced by the display, even if the display potentially has better capabilities. And then the same happens with dark detail. Dark detail, as we say, drowns in the blacks. So you lose some of that detail in the process of conforming the image to today's container. So you basically have a much bigger input range, and then you're trying to fit it into a smaller box or a smaller pipe. And that's where the compromises get made or have to be made. That's where the colorist sits next to the director in the color grading suite. They look at the signal and they say, when as I remember the scene on set, this and that happened, and this and that element was in the image, and I would really like to represent that, but I can't because I have these very limited ranges to my availability. And what then typically happens is that one object in the image gets pulled out and gets focused on in terms of characterizing it correctly, representing it correctly, and then ancillary information such as backgrounds or skies, etc. All of those elements get compromised, meaning that typically you have a tough time differentiating between skies and clouds, for example, because that's usually an area that gets compromised, or simply dark detail. We have a demo clip in some of the scenes that we're showing where we have a car driving out of a garage, and then the interior of the garage in the Rec 709 in current today's 8-bit world gets crushed because there's no more range available to represent that part of the image, because all the focus is on the car that drives out and is in the sunlight, and there's beautiful reflections. So you have to pick one or the other that you want to focus on when you do the color grading step. And with Dolby Vision, those compromises basically disappear. You can represent all of the different areas of very bright, very dark detail, and then of course the average brightness elements as well, without having to make those compromises. And that is a beautiful thing for creatives, because it opens up a whole new palette of colors and of options for them to compose an image that they would like to show you. Like the story that the director wants to tell you can be told in a much more realistic way and much closer to the original intent than what is possible today.
Mm-hmm. The other point I wanted to make sure we just touched upon is that as you expand the dynamic range, as you make it wider and wider and wider, if you retain an 8-bit representation of brightness, you're going to start seeing banding or areas of solid. You're going to start seeing the quantization, in other words, of the brightness, right?
That's absolutely correct. Yeah. So quantization or banding, as it's called, is a problem, and that is also something that even today you can see with 8-bit video. You see it even more extremely if you look at some of the online video that is quantized at even lower bit depths. There it's very obvious, but even with Blu-ray quality or broadcast quality video, 8-bit is often not enough, and that's where these compromises. When you see banding, you're basically at the very verge of the compromise when it just becomes impossible to represent the image. And a good colorist will see that prior to delivering the material and will avoid that. But that requires a lot of work to get the information right. And it's still compromised. You still have to make trade-offs, and you have to spend a lot of work. One of the directors that we showed our demo clips to, he said that when on his most recent movie, they spent a lot of time in color grading to get the blue skies right, because blue is particularly difficult, because if you think about 100 nit representation of the overall image, and in an RGB system, blue is about 7 or 8% of that. And so you can never really get saturated blue skies with today's system. It's always a compromise. And in order to get that done, excuse me, to get that done anyway, they have to do a lot of windowing and pull out some of the areas of the image, and that's a lot of work, and they still can't get it right. And that is it was a big revelation for them when we showed them some of our demo clips, and then also some of the regraded clips that we did from existing Hollywood movies, and really basically showed what was hidden in the source material that nobody has ever seen, even the director has not seen until today, until we recolor graded it for Dolby Vision and showed it on our reference display, and people are absolutely blown away by some of the detail and elements that become visible in the signal that were hiding in there all along, but just couldn't be pulled out.
I have to say, the clip that you mentioned of the car pulling out of the garage from the darkness into the light is quite remarkable, because, as you say, you can see fine details in very low light or dark portions of the image, while at the same time you can see the details in the high brightness portions of the image. Really, really quite remarkable. Web9444 in the chat room is asking, Can this Dolby imaging or Dolby Vision package be applied to any display via firmware, or is it really a hardware thing?
So it is a hardware thing. So, I mean, the elements that need to be added to a TV that enable it to understand the Dolby Vision signal. It's a new signal representation, so there needs to be some decoding capability. And then the second component that we're adding is a algorithm that we call display mapping, that essentially takes this new color grade that has been graded to 4,000 nits peak brightness and wider color gamut, and then maps it down to exactly what the display is capable of. So the beautiful thing about Dolby Vision is that we create a signal that is so far superior in terms of its dynamic range representation that it will be superior for years or even decades to come, because TVs today do not have the capability to show exactly what our reference display can show. But every year TVs get better, they will be able to take more advantage or take advantage of a higher percentage of what is in the signal and show that. So we call this, or we refer to this essentially as a tops-down approach. You have a high-quality source that you map down from, versus today where you have a bottleneck, an 8-bit video signal that you stretch up from. And this is, the tops down versus bottoms up really results in a significant quality difference. We usually do this demonstration by taking two identical televisions off the shelf that are, pretty decent, fairly high-end TVs. And we're feeding one with today's signal, which essentially is the Blu-ray version or the 8-bit Rec 709 version, the best you can get for home delivery. And then the other TV we feed with the mapped version of the Dolby Vision source. The Dolby Vision master gets mapped down to exactly what this TV is capable of showing. And of course, this is a simulation because none of those TVs have Dolby Vision built in. But for the purpose of the demonstration, we're showing it because we want to highlight how much better TVs are today than what they're being delivered in terms of signal quality. So TV manufacturers have every reason to take advantage of what Dolby Vision can offer to make their TVs shine even more. And that's possible with even today's television designs, as long as they have some kind of local dimming backlight. That is probably one of the core requirements. But beyond that, it's really, whatever the display can show, we can map to that exact display with the Dolby Vision mapping algorithm, and that produces an amazing image. But the bottom line is it's going to be a new TV in order to take advantage of this.
Now, yes, in that demonstration you were just describing, where you're taking the much more information that Dolby Vision can represent and mapping it down to the capability of current TVs, are you using the current TV's expanded color gamut and expanded dynamic range to its fullest, or are you still staying within the 100 nits and Rec 709?
No, we go well beyond that. So Dolby Vision can, as I said, go up to 10.
Dolby Vision can go beyond that,
right.
But are you using that capability in a particular display that you're demonstrating in this case?
Yeah, so what we're doing is we're using a Dolby Vision signal as a source, and then we're mapping it. Let's say the TV can show a peak brightness of 600 nits and a color gamut of, I don't know, maybe 105% of Rec 709. So we map specifically to those parameters versus the Rec 709 signal at the source would be stretched to those parameters. So the TV would make this up, as we talked about earlier, through video processing. So it would just guess what those signals should look like. And if you look at that comparison side by side, that's a pretty striking difference.
Yeah. The other thing that strikes me about this whole idea of mapping is that if you take a higher quality signal and downscale it, if you will, in these various parameters, dynamic range, color gamut, and so on, you're likely to get a better result than if you deliver the standard from the beginning. It's the same as shooting at 4K and then downscaling that to 1080p. That looks better than if you acquired the image at 1080p to begin with.
Yes, absolutely. That's very similar. That's also the analogy I always draw is, back in the days when you had still standard definition video, but the content was shot in HD, that looked a lot better than content that was shot in SD and delivered in SD. And as you say, the same applies to 4K content that is acquired at 4K and then delivered or displayed at HD. So the same principle applies here, but what is very important is that this mapping algorithm is precise. So what we have done, I mean, that's probably the core value proposition of Dolby Vision, is the display mapping algorithm, because this algorithm maps dynamic range and color gamut simultaneously. And it's very easy to get that wrong. It's very easy to screw it up, and it's also very, very easy to not represent the artistic intent at any given output mode. So as you can imagine, there are a dozen different LCD panel manufacturers in the world. There are 24 TV manufacturers. The permutations of TV product with a given panel is enormous, and our mapping algorithm is designed to map to any of those combinations. I mean, the parameters that the algorithm is expected to map to will be determined essentially in the factory by characterizing the display once it's in the final product, and then dialing those parameters into the algorithm as the expected output. So the display mapping algorithm will know what it's expected to output to, and then will be able to take in any Dolby Vision mastered content and then map it exactly to those ideal parameters of the respective display, while maintaining the artistic intent, so that colors don't get shifted, and that signs or colors of cars or very clear and
skin tones, for example.
Skin tones, very, very important, yeah. So that those really look right, and that's something that the ability to do this is really something that was one of the key contributors to earning the trust of the Hollywood directors and the studios. We've done this before in audio, where our Dolby audio systems carry metadata to ensure that when the content, when it's mixed and delivered in 5.1 and then played back in 5.1, that's one thing. But if the 5.1 mix on the disc is delivered and played back in stereo or surround or on a phone, you have to change the audio. You have to change the dynamic range. You have to change the number of channels that you're outputting. All of that needs to be done in a predictable manner, and predictability is the key thing here. As soon as you can show the director in the post-production suite that, look, here's what your content is going to look like when it's played back on this TV, or when the audio is played out through this particular system, and they can predict it, and it's controllable, and it's not done randomly by the respective device, that's when you earn the confidence of the people who have created the content, because they know that their content will be preserved and always played back at the best possible quality level.
Actually, this reminds me also of Dolby Atmos, which is the new, relatively new movie sound system, which I believe also dynamically readjusts itself depending upon how many speakers are in the particular system it's playing back on. It can even fold down to 5.1 or even stereo, I assume. So it's doing something of a similar sort of mapping depending upon the capabilities of the given system that it's playing on.
Absolutely. Yes. So Dolby Atmos is another example of how we are taking, opening up the artistic freedom for mixers to be able to do many new things, but at the same time retaining the predictability of the presentation under many different or any circumstance, and that's really key here.
Right. Quixton UK in the chat room is asking, will this require a new light emitting diode, a new LED light source in the TV?
Actually, no. So we are working with TV manufacturers around existing TV designs. So most of them use white LEDs for local dimming, backlights. Our reference displays use RGB LEDs for the backlight and the local dimming. But fundamentally, as I said earlier, the good news is that the TV designs from some of these manufacturers, especially their high-end models, are so good already that once you flip the switch and you feed them with a Dolby Vision signal versus a regular signal, a regular 8-bit signal, they're already showing an enormous quality difference. And the second part to the story is that now TV manufacturers have even more of a reason to build much better televisions in terms of picking panels that have wider color gamut and creating a backlight that can go up to higher peak brightness, also has a better local contrast performance. Local contrast is very important here. That's what you mentioned earlier, Scott, that the ability to, extend the range of the darkest represented pixel and the brightest represented pixel at the same time in the same frame of video. That is a very important metric for this system, because that's how you present dynamic range. Just looking at peak brightness doesn't help you, because you can have a super bright display that has a horrible local contrast ratio, and the grays or the blacks will all be washed out and it will be unwatchable. So the combination or the convolution of these different metrics and parameters is what's important here. And that's essentially how we will be testing those TVs. We will be testing them against parameters that are the combination of peak brightness, local contrast, color gamut, screen size is an important factor here also. And then, once all of those parameters are tuned optimally or play together in the best possible way, that's when you get a great Dolby Vision product.
Da Vinci Wonder in the chat room is asking, if local dimming is required, does that mean manufacturers need to phase out thin edge-lit screens? Will this work with an edge-lit TV?
So the honest answer is we don't know yet. We're at the very, very early stages of looking at what is possible. The reality is that all of the TVs that we've shown at CES and the product that our manufacturing partners that we've announced so far are planning to bring to market will be Ultra HD resolution panels, and they all have local dimming backlight. So that's a great starting point, but I'm not excluding the option that edge-lit may also qualify. If you have a very good panel that has great contrast performance on its own, then edge-lit may very well work, but it's early days for that, so we haven't gone down in terms of from the high end to the mid-end tiers in terms of product development to see what can be done, how low can you go in terms of complexity and product spec. I mean, it obviously has an impact on price and volume or BOM cost and volume of the device. So it's an interesting question, but as I said, we have a lot of expertise in building displays. Professional displays. This expertise we are contributing to our manufacturing partners so that hopefully together we can build the greatest product. And once we go beyond just the high end, then we need to look at what the other options are. The other good news is that Dolby Vision is really display agnostic. So conceptually you could combine this with OLED or plasma if you wanted to, because it really is about the performance of the panel. It doesn't have to be LCD with LED backlighting. That's just the most commonplace display technology today. But we'll see what the future brings in terms of other display technologies.
Sure. Quickston UK and others in the chat room are also asked that question about what about OLED and plasma. I think we don't need to really worry much about plasma. It's kind of on its way out. But OLED or OLED might be something coming in. And I've certainly seen a couple of the early commercial models of OLED TVs. And boy, they're sure capable of a lot of brightness. So they don't have to worry about the top end of the brightness range. And at the bottom end, man, they are truly black. I mean, they just are invisible when they're showing something black. So it seems to me that OLED might be a perfect candidate display technology for Dolby Vision.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned earlier, it's not all about the peak brightness. OLEDs typically have a lower peak brightness than what you can do with LCD or LED backlit LCDs, but that's not a problem because, as you say, their local contrast performance, their ability to go completely black is absolutely amazing. And we actually have done some tests with some of our TV OEM partners and provided Dolby Vision signal into OLED screens, and the result was phenomenal. I mean, you just have to, as I said, tune the display mapping algorithm to dial in the right parameters of each display. And the parameters for an OLED panel will be very different from the parameters of an locally dimmed LCD panel. But the local contrast range you get and the color gamut is spectacular. So absolutely, yeah, that's we're very much looking forward to exploring that further.
Yeah. Space Diver in the chat room is asking, would this algorithm completely negate the need for display calibration?
That's a good question. So, so we, what we are, hopefully, let's put it that way, hopefully. So we are working right now on finalizing our deliverables to our TV manufacturing partners, and in there, what we're right now thinking that there needs to be a Dolby Vision reference mode that really shows the image to the best capabilities of the respective display, but other than that, really turns off all kind of other processing to really give you the director's intent. Now, of course, TV manufacturers want to differentiate, so every TV manufacturer will still want to be able to apply certain presets or viewing modes on top of the mapped Dolby Vision signal, and that is fine. The good news is they're starting from a much higher quality image, and then they can apply the if they wanted to the vivid mode or whatever viewing modes they prefer. And as I said, that's fine. But what we will find is that since Dolby Vision already uses the maximum brightness of the display, because it maps perfectly to what the display can show at its best or at its highest brightness setting, there really is nowhere to go above that because the TV is already at its maximum. So we expect that these viewing modes will be designed in a different way. And of course, there are other functions and other parameters like frame rate conversion or spatial scaling, etc., that will be applied in an orthogonal way. So those will be applied in addition or in parallel to some of the processing that we do for Dolby Vision, and those will be available as they are today. So Dolby Vision does not compromise any of the features that the TV manufacturers are like to use. It doesn't require anybody to give anything up in terms of features they like or just particular viewing modes, or as I said, frame rate conversion. Some people like to watch images at 240 hertz. Others like to watch them at 24 hertz. Both are fine depending on your personal preference, and that will still be possible.
Mm. We got deep into dynamic range. I want to make sure we touch upon color gamut as well, which is the range of colors that can be represented by the TV and in the signal. And we have a graphic to show you two different color gamuts. It's the one graphic, John, that you haven't showed yet, which looks kind of like the one over my shoulder here, which is what's called the CIE color diagram. It's not that one. It's the one that looks kind of like a colored horseshoe and has a couple of triangles in it.
Don't have that one, Scott.
Oh, you don't have that one. I'm so sorry. I thought I sent it. My apologies. Okay, well, then we'll just have to wing it. And really what we're talking about is being able to reproduce a wider or greater range of colors that red will be can be redder, and green can be greener, and blue can be bluer. And I just want to make sure that we all understand that that's another part of Dolby Vision, is allowing that greater range of colors, which gives us a more accurate picture that more closely represents or reflects, mimics what we see in the real world. For example, Rec 709, which is our current color gamut standard, cannot reproduce the exact color of red that Coca-Cola uses, for example.
That's absolutely correct. So we have the red of the London bus or the green of the California highway sign. So those are some examples that are usually quoted as being out of gamut colors, if you will, or if you like, for Rec 709. So with Dolby Vision, we are again not trying to reinvent the wheel. So there are standards for color representation that have been created for digital cinema and for Ultra HD, the latest one being the ITU Rec 2020, which is a significant increase in terms of color gamut capability over both Rec 709 and P3. And
by the way, just for anybody who might not know that term, P3 is the color gamut used in digital cinema.
That's correct.
And so we might, at some point, not too far in the future, actually have a greater range of colors available at home than we can see in the cinema, which is quite remarkable.
Yes, absolutely. So the good news is that this gives, again, the display manufacturers a good reason to build better looking displays and TVs. And over time, there will be televisions that will be able to reproduce Rec 2020 colors. We can, from day one, store the signal representation in Dolby Vision that encompasses the Rec 2020 colors. And that is essentially a great way of aligning with existing standards, and by trying not to reinvent the wheel with yet another color gamut or color representation. So this is an important factor. And the one thing that is also important to note is that as people look to that horseshoe that you referred to, Scott, that diagram or that chart is a slice at the particular luminance level. Now, what is happening is that if you have 100 nits of peak brightness with Rec 709, that's where all colors eventually migrate to peak white. That is why if you want to show a very bright red or yellow in Rec 709, it starts to get washed out because it starts to gravitate towards the white point. Now with Dolby Vision, you can retain the saturation and the exact color that you would like at much higher brightness values. So you can go up in brightness and show a very bright yellow or a bright red, which before, again, wasn't really possible. You either had to show it very red, but then it was not bright, or you showed it bright, but then it was more washed out because it gravitated towards the white point. So those are very important design characteristics that we took into account when we designed the system. And the overall representation we call color volume. So that's the combination of color gamut and the dynamic range, because as we said, color changes at different brightness levels. And with Dolby Vision, we try to maintain as much saturation or ability to represent color at very high peak brightnesses as well.
A high peak brightness leads me to another question that I wanted to make sure to cover, which is, I get this question a lot. If the brightness of the TV is increased by a factor of more than 10, from 100 to say 1,000 or even 4,000, so that's a factor of 40, won't that burn out our eyeballs? I mean, when I see a 100 nits peak white, a white field anyway, a white window, a full white screen in a dark room, I'm almost squinting. Now, if I increase that brightness by a factor of 10 or 40 or 50 or whatever, that would seem to me that it would end up being painful.
Right, that's a very good question. So, of course, we asked ourselves the same question when we started out, and we said, well, what would a average consumer, somebody who likes to watch television, or home theater enthusiast, what would they like to see if they had the choice? So we built a display setup that would allow the representation of video to peak at up to 20,000 nits, and then basically gave people a slider and told them, well, so where would you put the specular highlights versus the average brightness? And this is important. This is where you differentiate between, you use the peak brightness for specular highlights, like reflections off of the hood of a car, or a plane that is reflecting the sunlight. So those specular highlights, they will go up and take advantage of those peak brightnesses, but the average brightness of the image will largely remain the same as what we have today. So today, even though as we said, the signal is graded to 100 nits, it typically is displayed already today at higher brightness, because as we said, the reference mode or the 100 nit mode is very dim. So typically TVs today display in their regular operating modes at between 300 nits and 600 nits. So that's already the standard, and that's where they do the stretching. And but then wouldn't it be nice to have some headroom available, some range where you can actually that you could give to specular highlights that it might be just a couple of pixels that go all the way to 4,000 or 10,000 nits one day, but those pixels matter because they give you the illusion of reality. That's what the image would look like if you looked at it with your own eyes, if you look out the window. And that's what really Dolby Vision is about, is to be able to retain reality or recreate reality in a much more accurate fashion. And that is done with the use of specular highlights that really make it all the difference when viewing an image that appears washed out on a regular display versus an image that looks realistic on a Dolby Vision display. The other thing that happens with this increased local performance capability and the ability to go bright in these specular highlights, that you get the perception of depth, because the image looks real. So it almost looks dimensional, even though it has nothing to do with a stereoscopic image, but it just looks real. So the cues about the image that you're seeing in your brain puts them together and suggests that this is reality versus looking at an image, because all of the elements like the shading, the colors, look realistic, and that's really what we're trying to reproduce with Dolby Vision. So we're not trying to suggest that we're blinding people in their living rooms. That's not what this is about. But the occasional specular highlight is something that is extremely not just watchable but extremely enjoyable, and that's what really makes the image appear to be very realistic.
Yeah. Now, we do have a few side-by-side images that I wanted to make sure we showed everybody. And we'll just take a look at one of them at a time. Doesn't matter what order they're in, to see sort of the difference between a conventional display and showing conventional signal image, and one showing Dolby Vision. Here, for example, is a girl in a field of flowers with a cloudy, somewhat cloudy sky in the background. And tell us what we're looking at here.
Yeah, so the first thing I want to say is that this representation really doesn't do it justice, because we're trying to create a simulation here of what the before and after looks like on a regular display. So really the display technology.
We're looking at a normal signal here too as well. We're not looking at a high dynamic range or a wide color gamut signal. So this is a simulation, I agree.
This is a simulation. This is a mapped image of the two different. So on the left, this is supposed to be a simulation of what the Rec. 709 image looks like when it's regularly graded. And on the right, we have the Dolby Vision version that is derived from the same source, but has been color graded to a different display. And then for the purpose of showing it here, is mapped back down to the dynamic range of what your computer monitor can show. Now, in reality, so this is something that people have done with in photography for a long time. High dynamic range photography, either with bracketed, taking different exposure images and recompositing them, or taking something like the high dynamic range feature on the iPhone that then recomposites it for you and creates a tone mapped image. That is one part of high dynamic range imaging. But what isn't happening in those cases is that you don't actually view the image in high dynamic range. You map it back down to regular standard dynamic range and then try to view it. And yes, there are some improvements or enhancements, but it also is, it makes the image look awkward in many cases. Whereas if you actually had a display that could show the dynamic range that you captured, that's when the sense of reality that I mentioned earlier really kicks in and becomes apparent.
Mm-hmm. And if we take a look at the next one, we will see either a flower or an airplane. There it is. And there, I think, is a great example of the specular highlights that you were talking about earlier. This airplane has a magnetic array, an aluminum skin, so it's very shiny and reflective. And you can see the highlights of the sun reflecting on the airplane's wings quite a bit better than you can on the other side. Not to mention that the ocean looks more natural. The whole image looks much better.
Exactly. So in the actual demo on our two displays, in comparison, the image on the left almost looks like the plane has been spray painted silver, and on the right it looks like polished aluminum, the way it's supposed to, because as I said, those specular highlights, they're much more defined. So the highest brightness whites off of one of the wings of the plane where the sun reflects. In Dolby Vision, there are much fewer pixels because it's much more defined, but they go much brighter. So the specular highlight is much more defined and augmented in terms of its amplitude, and that really is what you would expect when you actually looked at this with your own eyes.
I have to say, when I saw this demo that Dolby invited me and some other journalists to at your offices in LA, you started beautifully by showing the normal TV, just the regular old TV showing regular Blu-ray images, and I thought it looked fine. You know, looked great.
Yeah.
Then you turned on the Dolby Vision TV next to it, showing the Dolby, the higher dynamic range and color gamut, and the content being graded for that. And all of a sudden, the regular TV just looked totally washed out and dull and dim. And I mean, the comparison was startling, especially after looking at it by itself and saying, "Oh yeah, okay, sure, that looks great."
Yes, yeah, that demo is very effective. And as you said, some of the clips that we shot ourselves with the Arri Alexa camera, the scenes that we just saw were from those clips. Those work really well. But what also is fascinating is when you go back and regrade feature films that were already made, either shot on film and then rescanned on a higher dynamic range capable film scanner, or digital film productions that are using some of the more recent digital film cameras or digital movie cameras. The material that you get out of that sensor is truly fascinating, because you can go back and regrade to Dolby Vision, and you can see details that, as I said earlier, just have not been seen before, even by the director. So the person who shot the film was not aware that certain details were actually captured until he saw it on our display with our system. So that's truly fascinating, which means, in terms of, getting a bit more practical here, that you can easily imagine that film libraries from the past, but also new films, can fairly easily be graded to Dolby Vision. Right now, what we're working on is to build up a catalog of films that are available then on the streaming platforms like Amazon Instant Video or Vudu that we announced, or Netflix that we announced at CES, that then would stream Dolby Vision into these televisions that you will be able to buy later this year, early next year. And in order to build up that catalog, you have to do the work of color grading. Now, the good news is the color grading step is necessary for any new film, regardless. Now, you can either do it in the traditional way, or you can do it in the new Dolby Vision way. It doesn't take you any more time, and you can essentially just swap out the display that you're looking at. You train the colorist, you give them the necessary tools to do their work, and they're grading in Dolby Vision. So it's fairly straightforward, and that's what we're leveraging right now to get to a library of, a sufficient number of titles that we can launch with. And then we would expect that any new movie that comes through the Hollywood pipeline would also be graded in Dolby Vision.
Well, that brings up the question, you mentioned online streaming. How much transmission bandwidth is required? Is there a lot? Is there a lot more? There seems like there's a lot more information. So either it would have to be compressed even more than online content is, or you would need a bigger pipeline.
Right. So that's also a good question. That's one of the key components of our solution is to provide the ability to compress the signal in a way that retains backwards compatibility. So essentially what we're doing is we're using as what we call the base layer. That's the 8-bit video that we're used to today. Same thing. And then we put on top an enhancement layer that only requires about 10 to 20% of extra bandwidth, that then contains all of the extra dynamic range, extra color gamut, and it's all encoded efficiently into this enhancement layer at a relatively low incremental bitrate, which then gets delivered to the receiver, and the receiver puts it back together to the 12-bit version of the signal that we discussed earlier. So the reason we break it into two pieces is to retain the backwards compatibility. Because if you, for example, you buy a movie on Vudu, and you have it in your digital locker, you download it, and one day you watch it on your Dolby Vision TV, and it's great. On the next day you watch it on a different device that doesn't have Dolby Vision, you still want to be able to watch the legacy version or the regular 8-bit version without any problems. And that's why we break it into two pieces. And that is one of the reasons why the digital distribution retailers or over-the-top streaming providers like this solution so much, because they only have to cache and deliver and stream one version of the movie, and or one file that contains both versions, if you will.
Once it gets into the home, will HDMI 2.0 have the bandwidth necessary to carry it? I assume so.
So we have actually designed a solution that once the signal is decoded in a game console, we talked about how Microsoft Xbox Video was part of the list of partners that said they will be streaming Dolby Vision. So once it gets out of the game console, we have actually developed a way to send it or tunnel the information through today's HDMI standards. So it will even work with HDMI 1.4.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Can you tell us which studios you're working with who are now either grading or have committed to grade in Dolby Vision going forward and also on their legacy products?
Right. So I can't announce any names just yet, so stay tuned for that. But there are several of the majors that we're working with on, getting to the detail of selecting the titles that we're going to go and grade. It will be a combination of the new movies coming through the pipeline this year, as well as some, recent and high caliber library titles that, people love to watch over and over again, that will really make a big difference in Dolby Vision. So those are the ones we're focusing on first. But as I said, later on, and once we have more of these post-production houses equipped with our Dolby Vision reference display, then we expect the volume of titles that get created in Dolby Vision to increase very quickly.
But we will start to see titles become available later this year, early next year, in conjunction with the availability of TVs that can actually take advantage of the extra information, right?
Right, that's the idea, to time the arrival of the TVs with the availability of content, because otherwise the feature is not so interesting if you don't have content to watch.
It's kind of a chicken and egg problem, isn't it?
Yes, we're the masters of resolving the chicken and egg here at Dolby, so we're proud ourselves of that, and yeah, we'll make that happen.
Fantastic. Well, we've come to the end of a fascinating hour, and I want to thank you very much for being here. Will you come back and tell us about Dolby 3D, glasses-free 3D, which is another fascinating topic that I would love to talk about on the show?
Absolutely. It will be my pleasure, Scott.
Great. Fantastic. Roland Vlaicu, the Senior Director of Broadcast Imaging at Dolby Labs. You can find a bunch of information about Dolby Vision and everything Dolby at where else? Dolby.com. Thanks, Roland.
Thank you, Scott.
You can find me, of course, at avsforum.com. You can email me at scott@twit.tv. And you can follow me on Twitter at htgeekscott, also at avsforum. And you can find previous episodes of Home Theater Geeks right here at twit.tv/htg. Also on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/twit Home Theater Geeks. Next week, my guest geek is scheduled to be Alan Sides. Now, you might have noticed that last week we didn't have a new episode of Home Theater Geeks. Jury duty took care of that, but and that's when Alan was supposed to be on, but he's rescheduled for next week. So I do hope you'll join me for that. He's a recording engineer and speaker designer, so we're going to be talking about all things audio. I do hope you will join me for that, and until then, geek out.